how you're competing with the rest of the world. The Asians are leaving the Americans behind in many, many ways. You are an educator. Don't you believe that the United States of America ought to have some plan on how you're going to bring your game up in terms of how you are educating your people?
No, because the problem is our suffering is precisely due because the government plans education. The vast, vast majority, approximately 90% of all young people in the United States go to government-run schools. Governments at either the local or state level decide on the curriculum. They select the textbooks. They supposedly certify and determine the competency of the teacher. Our decline in education is precisely because government has planned education and has made a monstrosity of it.
So are you suggesting then that government should get out of education?
Absolutely. It should be private. I think you'd create an environment of innovation, competitive environment. Here's my curriculum. Send your daughter or son to my school. We can do it at a better price than him.
Yeah, but you can't afford it. I live in the project somewhere, and I earn $15,000 a year. I can't afford to send my daughter to a private school.
Poor people without a government subsidy buy shoes. If you let the market free and lowered taxes as you got rid of government funding of education, for everybody in the society, you'd see a vibrant growth of competitive, yes, affordable and competitive, and over time far more effective in devising creative ways to inspire students, to educate students, and train them and fill their minds with the right ideas for the future.
So you really, Dr. Ebeling, believe in the laissez-faire system?
I believe in a system of freedom, as opposed to a system of control in which the presumption is that a handful of politicians and bureaucrats have enough in their limited knowledge of their minds to plan for the rest of us.
But there are some countries in the world where the government plans the system of education and responsible for educating the citizenry, and they're doing extremely well. Cuba is a very good example. The Cubans are educating their people extremely well. There's a surplus of doctors and engineers, and they asked the other day whether or not the United States was interested in getting some of them when you had Katrina. They have a well-educated population.
Look at the very way you expressed that. A surplus of doctors. They've trained more doctors than their economy needs. That's a waste of educational resources.
No.
Now, part of the reason why there's a surplus of doctors is because they don't allow private medicine in Cuba. You either work for the government or you work for nobody. And what has Raul Castro just said? He said, we have to get rid of 500,000 government jobs, get a job in the private sector. I wish the President of the United States would say the same thing as Raul Castro. You're fired from the government, go get a privant job.
No, but
maybe Raul Castro, as an advocate of free enterprise, should become President of the United States.
The point is, shouldn't government be concerned about the development of people, of the citizenry?
I believe that the responsibility of the development of people reside in people themselves and their families, because they know the circumstance best, they know the needs of their children, they know to more wisely determine the nuanced requirements of their specific children, rather than a straitjacket of one-size-fits-all, presumably for all children everywhere.
Dr. Ebeling.
All right, Godfrey, hold your question. We're going to be back with Dr. Ebeling, Professor Ebeling from Northwood University. If we take this break, we'll come right back. Here we are on the platform today, speaking with Dr. Richard Ebeling. Godfrey Eneas.
Dr. Ebeling, I believe that there's a segment in a society which depends on the government, for which I feel that the government has a responsibility. And I think one of the differences between developing countries and developed countries is that in developed countries, people have evolved to where they have a higher sense of responsibility. And as a result, the dependency on government is not as great. Respond to that.
Well, I think that to the extent that people have a higher sense of responsibility to have a concern, charitable, philanthropic concern for others, I think that is cultivated in a free society. It's precisely where the government taxes the citizenry, perhaps extensively, and then redistributes or transfers that wealth to other groups that presumably are needy or deserving, that those who are taxed often develop an impersonal insensitivity. I paid my taxes. It's not my concern. It's the government's concern. I think that it's in a more open and free society, a less government paternalistic society, in which individuals, and you mentioned Christian values earlier, where people must take personal responsibility. Am I my brother's keeper?
Right.
Do I have a role through my church? Do I feel a calling as a private individual to join some philanthropic cause? It could be to cure some terrible disease or help those who fall upon misfortune. And I believe that that avenue is far superior to, as I was suggesting earlier, this idea of the government bureaucratic method of one size fits all. A diversity of different private philanthropic organizations, each dependent upon contributions and the proof to the donors that money is being well spent, that they're pinpointing who needs it, what are their particular nuanced and specific requirements, rather than sort of homogenizing everyone as the poor, the needy, and making them fill out a bureaucratic form, determining if they're eligible, and then they get a handout or a public housing or whatever. I think that the avenue to try to really help people is more the diversity and the heterogeneity of private sector avenues than the government's single approach.
But don't you achieve that through education?
Yes, of course. But the point is, it's sort of like the story of the man in the old story who said that he would never go into the water until he knew how to swim. You won't know how to swim until you go into the water. That requires people having to take responsibility for their lives, bearing the costs and the burdens of their mistakes as well as their successes. And as they are successful, seeing that if others don't take responsibility for family, for friends, others in the community that might matter to them, that they must take that responsibility. And in fact, in that laissez-faire period that you were sort of challenging me about, that image of it in the 19th century, when government was practically doing none of these things, that was an outburst of unbelievable charity and philanthropy in, for example, the Great Britain of that time. And precisely because the government wasn't doing it, it fell upon the generous shoulders of others who were better well off in the society.
But Dr. Ebeling, the response to that period was the welfare society, which went in the opposite direction. Because people were being exploited. People didn't have good education. The miners were being economically exploited. Poor people were abound in England.
With all due respect, that is one misinterpretation of the economic history of that time. The fact is, throughout the 19th century, when government was doing very little or minimal amount of these welfare safety net programs, the British economy was growing. Let's remember that before the Industrial Revolution, everyone was poor. And, a few noblemen, someone, a church head, they had some wealth. But everyone else was abjectly poor. It was the Industrial Revolution, private enterprise, in mass production, the competition of businessmen for employers in the emerging factory system that raised the demand and the wages of the workers. So that slowly but surely, not everyone at the same time, as the 19th century progressed, you saw rising standards of living all the way across the board, the creation of something that had never existed in history before, the middle class.
Yeah, but if you want to be fair about this, in Eric Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery, his contention is that slavery financed the Industrial Revolution.
Slavery ended in the 1830s under the heroic and moral acts of...
No, that's in America, but I'm talking in the British Empire.
It ended in 1836?
Yeah, but they still had colonies. And the colonies were still being exploited.
Excuse me. In the 1830s, Parliament abolished slavery in the British Empire.
1834, yeah.
Okay? And the fact is that what you mean by slavery was the fact that accumulated capital in European countries such as Great Britain were made available to underdeveloped countries.
No, sir.
Yes, it was.
No,
That's
sir.
what built the railroads. That would build the canal.
No,
India would not have had railroads if not for British capital.
The colonial powers exploited us. They took the wealth and took it to Europe, and the wealth from the colonies built the European economy.
I beg to differ.